We just heard from Brian Anderson, and before that, in the 1 o'clock hour, from Bob Costas. And I'm just texting with Brian during the commercials, and he told me a story that he didn't get a chance to tell on the air. And he said nobody really knows this. He said, but Bob Uecker was very close to becoming the Yankee announcer a few times. George Steinbrenner made him an offer, and he cleared it through Bud Selig, who was the owner of the Brewers at the time. And then Ueck ultimately declined because he was Milwaukee through and through. So it was Selig that told Brian Anderson that story when Brian was starting to do more national games, and Bob confirmed it to to Brian, and made sure that Brian didn't leave Milwaukee either. So how amazing how life would have been different for Yankee fans if they had Bob Uecker. So George Steinbrenner could see what a brilliant broadcaster and entertainer that Uecker was, and made him an offer. And I guess it was a possibility for a little bit, but then Ueck ultimately turned it down. So many things going on in baseball, despite the hot stove being a little bit cold. You know, we spent so much of yesterday talking about Pete Alonso, and I said, got to get Buster on the air to find out what he's hearing. And Buster Olney, our friend and colleague, joins us now on the K Show. Buster, how you doing, my friend?
Well, sad like a lot of people in baseball because of Bob Uecker. I didn't know him that well, just to say hi. I was texting with Craig Counsell, the longtime Brewers manager, who, of course, grew up in Wisconsin, and he was saying about how, he met Uecker when he was 10 years old, and he said the best half hour of every day was the time he got to spend with Uecker. I mean, he's just so beloved within the sport, which is pretty remarkable considering the fact he wasn't a star as a player. You know this, and that story you just told, that's amazing. How could that have affected your trajectory, Michael?
And John Sterling, many people's trajectory. I never knew it. I never knew.
That is unbelievable that's the case. But I would say this about the hot stove. It is heating up. It is definitely percolating now.
Now, I saw something that you tweeted out just moments before we got you on the air, that the Mets really are serious about trying to acquire Vlad Guerrero, right?
Yeah, and you're trying to figure out how this all fits, right? And it's pretty clear the trajectory of the Mets is with Pete Alonso. Like, look, we, especially owner Steve Cohen, from what I've heard, he loves Alonso. He wants to retain him. They made the $158 million offer in 2023. Pete turned it down. It looks like it's a major mistake. The two sides, Pete's side and the Mets, have agreed, and any deal moving forward would be on a 3-year deal if it happened, but they're not agreeing on the salary. And I think after the Jesse Winker trade, I reached out to a source and said, does this really mean that the Mets are preparing to move on past Alonso? And he said it's trending that way. And, one of the interesting, as David Stearns, in his time as head of baseball operations for the Brewers, he made it pretty clear that, he was not going to overpay for the big power, big swing and miss first baseman. Chris Carter led the National League in home runs, and he non-tendered him. Well, Pete is that type of first baseman. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., on the other hand, he's a power hitter who hits for average. Last year, 199 hits, 96 strikeouts. As you know, he's a free agent after next year. And there are other teams kind of circling around the Blue Jays, wondering if at some point the Blue Jays, who've been desperate to get an anchor star, would consider trading him because their conversations about a multi-year deal have gone nowhere to this point. They're far apart. And goodness, I mean, when you think about it, it all kind of makes sense because the Blue Jays now, reportedly are in conversations with Alonso. But they could pivot and, pay a Pete Alonso or an Alex Bregman to be the signature star. And then at that point, maybe they move on past Vladdy and they're willing to trade him. And the Mets, from what I'm told, really want Vladdy. Can you imagine Soto and Vladimir Guerrero Jr., both in their mid-20s, those two guys going back-to-back as two great power hitters who don't strike out very much? It would be dynamic.
I'll tell you what, Buster, if they traded Vladdy, I mean, you could look at this offseason for the Toronto Blue Jays and say it's just abysmal. I mean, they haven't been able to give away their money. And I was told by a pretty good source that they were willing to outbid the Mets for Soto, but they just can't get anybody to take their money. And then they're going to trade away probably their most visible star. I don't know how that fan base is going to react.
Well, at some point, though, I think what's happened in recent off seasons is that the Blue Jays front office hasn't gotten, a grip on reality. They are clearly in a situation now where in 2025 they're not poised to contend, with the Yankees team that won the American League last year, with a Red Sox team that's clearly getting better, with the Orioles who've had a disappointing offseason but still really talented. And I know from talking with folks with other teams, they've been watching the Blue Jays saying, you know what, at some point you got to deal with reality here. And the reality is, they're not close to signing Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to a long-term deal. And if he's not going to sign, then they're in the same position the Red Sox were, in their minds with Mookie Betts. Then you got to probably, to get value for him, think about trading him. And now would be the best time to trade, as you know. Trade position players is in the offseason and not during the season, because during the season it's a very specialized market. It's a very limited market. If they're going to trade him, now would be the time to do it, to pivot. And, again, if they're looking for a signature star going forward, maybe that helps free up money for Bregman, for Pete Alonso, whatever. But at some point, the Blue Jays seem to be coming to a crossroad and a decision of what they're going to do with Vladdy.
It is fascinating, though, on the Met side. I mean, would you be willing to give up a king's ransom to Toronto for Vlad when you could outbid everybody and their mother after the 2025 season when he becomes a free agent? I mean, the Yankees knew with Soto, there was going to be a lot of bidding for him, but nobody's going to outbid Steve Cohen for anybody that he wants. So how much would the Mets be willing to give up to Toronto just to get that extra year of Vlad?
And they've done that before with Francisco Lindor, right?
Yes.
When they made the trade with Cleveland, that's exactly what they did, despite the fact folks with other teams, their feeling was, why would you trade for the player now and then pay him big money in before he became a free agent? That's exactly what they did with Lindor. Maybe it's to get access to the player. Maybe it's a case where Steve Cohen, as the richest owner of baseball, can go, I don't care. And I think we got to remember this. The Mookie Betts trade demonstrated pretty clearly that you can get a really good player a year from free agency without necessarily giving up everything. The price for Juan Soto was high. You would assume that the price for Vladdy wouldn't be quite as high. But the Mets have this surplus of position player prospects, which happens to be exactly what the Blue Jays need. Their farm system is thinned out. They need names. They need volume. That's what the Mets have at the top of their farm system.
Really fascinating stuff. Now, we mentioned this about the Yankees yesterday. I want to hear if you're hearing anything. So it came out the other day that Brian Hayes is asking the Pirates to trade him. I think that's a perfect talent for the Yankees to slide into third base, eminently affordable on a long-term deal. Is there any traction there? Will the Pirates accede to his demands?
Well, remember, they had a similar situation with their outfielder Brian Reynolds, where there'd been a story that his preference was to be traded, and they eventually worked out a long-term contract, or they settled that situation. With Hayes, I think one of the questions within the industry about him is how often he's gotten hurt, but he's really valued, especially as an elite defensive third baseman. I agree with you; he'd be a great fit for the Yankees. The question is, if you put a player that young and that dynamic out in the marketplace, could the Yankees, who did not have a good year with their farm system, be able to compete for, to make a Hayes trade? When it came to Garrett Crochet, they were never really in the conversation. The White Sox basically looked at the Yankee farm system and how guys were performing during last season, and the White Sox weren't interested in talking to them. I guess the question would be whether or not the Pirates would see more value among the players the Yankees might talk about.
Going back to Guerrero, I've heard in different stories that I've read that he's looking for a contract that starts with $400 million over 10 years. Is that fairly accurate?
Okay, so I don't know exactly what he turned down, but I was told that the Blue Jays were aggressive, that there was something probably in the mid-300 range, and that they were told that's not even close. Okay.
Wow.
One general manager had a great observation a couple of weeks ago to me. He said, with Ohtani last winter and with Soto this winter, we have normalized $400 million contracts. Like that's becoming like, oh yeah, you can get $400 million. And this general manager said to me, there are not a lot of teams out there that could actually entertain that type of contract. Well, guess which team could?
Right.
The New York Mets are probably in the position where they could pay one guy, whatever the total value, including the perks for Soto would be, $55 million. Maybe it's evaluated at some point. They could be the one team that could pay two players $100 million and not blink.
Isn't this amazing, though, Buster? In a period of about 2 years, the Aaron Judge contract is an absolute steal for the Yankees.
I know. Well, think about even more so the contract that Shohei Ohtani signed for $700 million with most of it deferred. As you know, $680 million deferred 10 years from now looks like a disaster.
Yeah, unbelievable.
1 year.
Where's Santander going to land?
So it's clear he's dealing with the same dynamic, I think, that Pete is to some degree, that people, they love the power, but there's concern about the defense. They're concerned about how the player is going to age, what other skills are out there. The Blue Jays, as you know, have been connected with them all winter. I do wonder, and I don't know if it would be Santander or maybe Jurix and Profar, this news we got earlier in the week that the Cincinnati Reds have some extra television money. It wouldn't surprise me to see them sign an outfielder. I don't think they would sign a player as expensive as Santander now, but I think the Reds are potentially going to be one of the surprise teams this year. And I do think that before we get to spring training, they'll sign at least one more premium player.
Sasaki to the Dodgers or the Padres? What do you think?
My guess is he's going to go to the Dodgers because the Dodgers seem to get everybody that they want. I would say this. I asked people who were on these conference calls with him, what's your sense of his personality? And every person I spoke to said he's really quiet, he's really serious, and the takeaway from some of the people who've done background work on him is he really doesn't want the stage. Like Juan Soto is a star. Juan Soto loves the stage. He loves being in the spotlight. Their perception of Sasaki at 23, still a young guy, still evolving as a person, is that he doesn't necessarily want that. And the way that's being interpreted by the teams that we're talking to him is he either wants to be in a small market where he doesn't have to deal with idiots like me, or he wants to be like the 8th or 9th biggest star on a team, and that would obviously be the Dodgers. My guess is that the Dodgers get him, but, Padres, A.J. Preller, he's really inventive. And I can tell you this, so many of the teams that I've spoken to who are involved in this believe that the decision about where he's going to go was made weeks ago, and they're just waiting to hear what it is.
Yeah, it's become an episode of The Bachelor. He's handing out red roses and stuff like that. Just eliminating teams. It's weird the way he's doing it. It really is. Yesterday was the first day that he could be signed, right?
Yep, that's right.
So he's got a week to go.
And so, well, right. And we would expect, if we heard later today, if we heard tomorrow, we heard over the weekend that he picked a team, that's not going to be a surprise. It's imminent. And he's viewed as a significant talent, tall, great athlete, looks like a guy who's going to be able to adapt. I did have one evaluator tell me he thinks that he might have to start the year in the minor leagues just as he gets acclimated to Major League Baseball.
Talking with Buster Olney, our friend here on the Michael Kay Show. Final thing, I keep saying this on the air, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating it to our consistent listeners, but with the Yankees saying that they're content to go with DJ LeMahieu or a combination of Oswaldo Cabrera at third base, it reminds me of Bubba Crosby. Do you think the Yankees are going to go into the season with those two at third base?
I think when opening day happens, they'll have somebody else. Do I think that they're sitting here today saying, if that's where we land, then we'll be okay with that? I think that's the case because they've done a lot of other really great stuff this offseason. I think they put themselves in a better position. But I do think as time goes on and we get into spring training and teams maybe have some club has to shed money, some club have to move a contract, maybe Nolan Arenado changes. I don't know. I do think that something else will develop between now and opening day, and they're going to find a better alternative.
One final thing. What do you think Alonso's looking for? Because, again, that 3-year deal that he and the Mets have agreed on the parameters of that, I'm thinking Scott probably wants over $40 million a year. The Mets are probably in the mid-20s, right?
Your guess is close to where I am. I don't know exactly what what the Mets are comfortable with or what exactly he's asking for, but it's got to be north of $30 million, right? Considering what he turned down, the deal in 2023, what the total value was, and from what I understand, they're pretty far apart in terms of what the player's looking for and what the team is willing to pay.
Amazing, great stuff, Buster. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Michael.
You got it. That's Buster Olney. Good stuff from him. So it looks like a real possibility that the Mets might be able to do something for Guerrero. And if they do, then that opens up first base in Toronto for Alonso. Fascinating stuff going on right now.